Springfield has a problem. For 35 years, crimes have been committed in that town that nobody ever solved. A cat burglar escaped from a jail cell using a fake treasure map and was never seen again. A woman died at a NASCAR race in front of hundreds of witnesses, and no investigation was ever opened. The most documented criminal in the city's history has been arrested, convicted, and released so many times that the arrests stopped meaning anything. And somewhere out there, the real Principal Skinner is riding a freight train out of town, tied to a chair, while a judge's order makes it illegal to say his name. These are Springfield's cold cases, 10 of them. Every single claim in this video traces directly back to something that happened on screen. Welcome to Yellowfan. Let's get into it. Who shot Mr. Burns? The crime that shut down a town. Springfield Elementary School found oil. That sentence sounds simple, but the chain of events it started ended with a man bleeding out on a sundial and an entire town pointing fingers at each other. The shooting of Mr. Burns is the single biggest crime in Springfield's history. The only time the show stopped everything, held the answer back for an entire summer, and asked the audience to actually solve it. Most people remember the answer. Far fewer remember how perfectly the evidence was hidden in plain sight from the very first scene. Start at the beginning, because the beginning matters here. Groundskeeper Willie is digging on the Springfield Elementary grounds when his shovel strikes something. Oil. A massive underground deposit directly beneath the school. Principal Skinner starts calculating immediately. A new gymnasium, new teachers, instruments for the music program, everything the school has been unable to afford for years. Lisa Simpson, who had been watching her music program starved of funding for as long as anyone can remember, allows herself to feel something close to hope. The school is about to be rich. Mr. Burns finds out. He drills diagonally from his nuclear plant, tunnels beneath the street, and taps directly into the school's oil deposit. Springfield Elementary gets nothing. The oil flows into Burns's operation, and the school goes back to being exactly what it was: underfunded, falling apart, and unable to give Lisa her saxophone fund back. Burns takes the oil money and uses it to build something he has apparently always wanted: a giant mechanical disc that he positions over Springfield to block out the sun entirely. The whole town will now run on electricity from his nuclear plant. No solar power, no natural light. Every person in Springfield permanently dependent on Montgomery Burns. At a packed town meeting, Burns announces this plan. Half of Springfield was already furious at him before this moment. Groundskeeper Willie had a distant relative who left him an inheritance, land that Burns' drilling destroyed. Barney Gumbel's favorite bar, Moe's Tavern, had its foundation rattled by the drilling. Abe Simpson and the other residents of the Springfield Retirement Castle lost their cocoa hutch when the drilling came through. Homer Simpson had been showing up at the plant for weeks, trying to get Burns to remember his name. Burns had received a thank you gift from the Simpson family, eaten through the chocolates, and still could not identify who Homer was. Tito Puente had been exposed by Burns for accounting irregularities and fired from the school. Principal Skinner watched his school's future get stolen. Lisa watched her saxophone fund vanish. Burns stood in front of all of them and announced he was also taking the sun. Someone in that room shot him. He was found on the town sundial, barely alive, unable to speak clearly. His hands, as he collapsed, landed on 2 points of the compass, west and south. The police had a crime, a victim, and what appeared to be a clue. What they did not have was a shooter. Nobody saw who pulled the trigger. The screen went dark over a cliffhanger that ran all summer, and the show asked something it had never asked before: figure it out yourself. The writers planted real evidence in part 1. Not fake evidence, actual solvable clues that pointed to the real answer. The first one is easy to miss. Almost every background clock in the episode is set to either 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. This seems like nothing. It is not nothing. The clocks are training the viewer to think about a clock face, specifically to think about what the numbers look like when you flip them. A 3 and a 9 on a clock, when the hands point downward, make the shape of a W. The show is quietly teaching the audience to look at Burns's sundial position upside down. Burns's hands landed on W and S. upside down, the W becomes an M. The clue was never WS, it was always MS. Think about every character in Springfield with those initials. Mo Sislak, Marge Simpson, Maggie Simpson. The second clue is a scene earlier in the episode where Burns, emboldened by having fired Smithers, the one person who had always quietly stopped his worst impulses, looks down from a balcony and talks about stealing candy from a baby. He is not speaking in metaphor. Smithers was always there to say no. With Smithers gone, Burns has no one. The show is flagging that Burns, unrestrained, will do exactly that, steal candy from a baby. That is precisely what happens right before he is shot. Marge has Maggie in the car. Burns reaches in through the car window and tries to grab Maggie's green lollipop. For a moment, a split second, Homer's gun, which had been sitting in the glove compartment, falls out. Burns grabs it. Maggie grabs it back. The gun fires. Burns stumbles to the sundial. Maggie Simpson shot Mr. Burns. She was 1 year old. She did not understand what she was doing. Burns had his hand on the trigger when Maggie pulled it away from him. It was, in the most technical sense, an accident. Chief Wiggum, upon learning the truth, laughs it off entirely. No jury would convict a baby, he says. Maybe in Texas, but not here. Burns himself, recovering in the hospital, names Maggie as his shooter. He demands she be arrested. Wiggum declines. And that is where the official story ends. But the official story is not actually the end of what happened that day in Springfield. The shooting of Mr. Burns opened wounds that the resolution in Part 2 quietly walked away from. The school's oil was never returned. Burns stole it, used it, and when the case closed, the theft closed with it. Springfield Elementary stayed broke. Lisa's saxophone fund stayed empty. Willie's inheritance, the land Burns's drilling destroyed, was never compensated. The retirement home lost their cocoa hutch and never got it back. Burns's sun-blocking machine was torn down by the crowd after he was hospitalized, and Smithers was no longer available to protect it. But the destruction of that machine cost Burns nothing legally. He was a victim. He had been shot. The conversation shifted to who shot him, and every crime Burns committed in the weeks leading up to that shooting. The oil theft, the environmental damage, the deliberate plunging of a town into artificial darkness was quietly buried under the drama of the investigation. Burns recovered. Smithers returned. Life in Springfield resumed. There is one more thread that never resolved. The writers built a real mystery with real clues and ran a real contest. Anyone in America who correctly identified Maggie as the shooter would win a prize and be written into an episode as an animated character. The contest ran all summer. Only one person out of everyone watching got it right. They had posted the answer on a Simpsons fan message board on the very day Part 1 aired. They had read the sundial clue. They had followed the clock logic. They had worked it out correctly from the evidence alone. The writers found the post. The account was a college email address. By the time the season ended, the address no longer existed. The student had graduated or moved or simply let the account expire. The writers searched. They kept searching. Years later, on the DVD commentary for the episode, one of the writers was still mentioning it, still hoping someone would come forward. The only person who legitimately solved the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never found. The prize was never claimed. Somewhere out there, one person watched Part 1 in the summer of 1995, worked through the evidence, wrote the correct answer into a post that nobody else believed, and then disappeared. The shooting of Mr. Burns closed. The contest never did. What makes all of this stranger is that the crime itself, the pulling of the trigger, the falling on the sundial, the summer of suspicion, was almost certainly the least interesting part of what happened that week in Springfield. Burns stole from a school. He stole from the elderly. He stole the sun. He was stopped by a 1-year-old who grabbed back a lollipop, and the town of Springfield, which had every reason in the world to watch him go to prison for what he did, instead watched him go to a hospital and come home. The gun was recovered. The shooter was identified. The real crime went unpunished. And somewhere in the crowd that gathered around the sundial that night, Skinner, Willie, Moe, Tito, Abe, Homer, Bart, Lisa, all of them standing there, staring at a man they all had reason to hate, was one person who knew exactly how close they had come to getting away with it. The show moved on, but Springfield never really got an answer to the question underneath the question. Not who shot Mr. Burns, who deserved to. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What's next is a Springfield crime that was solved correctly, cleanly, with a full confession, and still ended with the criminal walking free, vanishing into the night with 2 decades of stolen wealth and a fake treasure map that sent the whole town digging in the wrong direction. Section 2. The Springfield Cat Burglar, the gentleman who got away. Springfield woke up one morning and everything was gone. Not everything in the dramatic sense. No buildings burned, no streets flooded, no disaster the town could point to and explain. Just the quiet, specific disappearance of things that mattered. Marge's pearl necklace, gone from its usual spot. Lisa's saxophone, lifted from its case without a sound. Bart's stamp collection, taken so cleanly that nobody heard the door. Across the street, across the block, across Springfield, the same story repeating in house after house. Someone had moved through the town while it slept and left behind only one thing at each location: a small business card. The card announced that the person responsible had been in business since the 1970s. Springfield had a cat burglar, had apparently always had one, and nobody had noticed for 20 years. Chief Wiggum and the Springfield Police Department responded the way they always respond to crime in Springfield, with complete and total uselessness. Officers were dispatched, reports were filed, nothing happened. The burglar kept working. A second night of thefts followed the first, then a third. The business card kept appearing at crime scenes like a signature, a small square of paper left in place of whatever had been taken. As if the burglar felt the people of Springfield deserved to know they had been robbed by a professional. Lisa Simpson was the one who felt the loss most directly. Her saxophone was not just an instrument, it was how she processed the world, how she communicated things she could not say out loud, how she got through days in a family and a town that rarely made space for someone who thought the way she did. Losing it was not the same as losing Marge's necklace or Bart's stamps. It was something closer to losing a part of herself, she told Homer. Homer, for once, heard her. He promised to get it back. This promise led Homer Simpson to become the head of a neighborhood watch group, which led to one of the more remarkable sequences of incompetence Springfield has ever produced. Ned Flanders initially attempted to organize the watch. He called the meeting, he stood at the front, he started to speak. Then the crowd decided they wanted Homer instead. Ned, being Ned, stepped aside without much argument. Homer's version of Neighborhood Watch looked almost nothing like Neighborhood Watch. He gave everyone code names. He made a list of objectives that included, buried somewhere in the middle, world domination. The group, which included Barney Gumble, Moe Sislak, Principal Skinner, and various other Springfield residents, spent its time doing almost everything except catching the burglar. Minor vandalism in Springfield dropped significantly while the watch was active. Assaults involving sacks filled with doorknobs went up by 900%. The watch had become something between a gang and a comedy routine, and the cat burglar continued operating without interruption. Then the burglar called into a live television program. Homer was being interviewed by Kent Brockman on his news show when the phone rang. The burglar, calm, cheerful, completely unbothered by the existence of an active neighborhood watch supposedly hunting him, told Homer directly that he planned to steal the world's largest cubic zirconia from the Springfield Museum. He named the specific item. He named the location. He essentially handed Homer a complete advance notice of his next crime and dared Springfield to stop him. Homer staged a stakeout at the museum. Homer got drunk with teenagers and passed out on the floor. The cubic zirconia was stolen. The Springfield newspaper ran the story the next morning with a photograph of Homer surrounded by empty beer cans, unconscious, under the headline announcing the theft. The town turned on him immediately. People threw vegetables. Jimbo Jones, one of Springfield's regular juvenile delinquents, told Homer he was so disgusted that he planned to go to law school as revenge for being let down by someone he had briefly believed in. That was the lowest point. Springfield had a thief it could not catch, a police force that could not function, and a vigilante group whose leader had fallen asleep during the one moment that required him to be awake. The answer came from the last place anyone thought to look. Grandpa Abe Simpson, living in the Springfield retirement castle, had a theory. His roommate, a white-haired, well-dressed, soft-spoken older gentleman named Malloy, was, Grandpa believed, the Springfield cat burglar. Grandpa listed 3 specific things he had noticed, things that did not add up when he thought about them carefully, details about Malloy's movements and habits that Grandpa had been sitting with for a while before deciding to say anything. Malloy was voiced by Sam Neill, and the casting matters here because Neill brought something specific to the role. A warmth that made the character immediately likable, a quality of elegance that made his crimes feel almost gentlemanly rather than threatening. When Malloy is caught, the audience understands why Springfield reacted to him the way it did. He was charming in a way that disarmed people. He was the kind of man who could live in a retirement home for decades, hiding stolen goods in plain sight in his room, and have nobody think to check because nobody suspected a pleasant old man. The police arrived at the retirement castle. They searched Malloy's room and found it, everything. The accumulated loot from the Springfield crime wave sitting in his room as casually as furniture. Malloy was arrested without resistance. He did not run, did not argue, did not pretend to be innocent. He accepted the situation with the same calm he had applied to every other part of his operation. Then something unexpected happened. Malloy, in custody, gathered himself and did something no one anticipated. He returned everything. Every item stolen from every home in Springfield. Marge's pearls, Lisa's saxophone, Bart's stamps, every single thing taken during the crime wave was handed back to its owner. Graciously, without complaint, without bargaining, he simply gave it all back. Springfield fell into a kind of confused affection for him. The people whose homes he had robbed stood around and found themselves not quite sure they wanted to see him go to prison. He had taken their things and then returned them. He was so pleasant about the entire situation. He had been in the retirement home the whole time. Right there, the most unlikely criminal imaginable, and somehow the most successful one the town had ever seen. He was put in a cell. The case appeared to be closed. Then Malloy said he had hidden treasure. He told Homer and Chief Wiggum that over his decades of work, he had accumulated a substantial hidden cache of wealth, stolen goods from years of operations across what one can only assume was a very wide range of locations before he settled into the retirement castle. This treasure, he said, was buried somewhere on the outskirts of Springfield. He described it with enough detail to sound convincing. He said to look for a big letter, a big T. The entire town of Springfield abandoned the jail site and ran. What followed was a sequence that paid direct tribute to the 1963 film It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, right down to the music, the camera angles, and the crowd of people racing across a landscape hunting for treasure under a large letter. Character after character appeared in the crowd, all of them convinced that Malloy's treasure was real, all of them racing toward it with the urgency of people who had temporarily forgotten every other concern in their lives. Caricatures of the original film's actors appeared in the background of the crowd scenes. The giant W from the original film was visible behind the T that Springfield found. The T was a palm tree, T-shaped. Out on the edge of town, exactly where Malloy said, they dug. They found a box. Inside the box was a note. Malloy had no treasure. There was no treasure. There had never been a treasure. He had made it up, described it convincingly, sent every person in Springfield racing to the wrong location, and used the window of time that created, an entire town distracted, the jail unguarded, the police off chasing a letter, to walk out of his cell and disappear. The note was polite. That was the thing about Malloy. Even his escape was polite. He thanked them, more or less. He left a clean ending to the interaction. He walked away into whatever came next for him, and Springfield never saw him again. Several people kept digging even after reading the note, convinced the treasure might still be real somewhere deeper in the ground. The camera held on them for a moment, standing in a hole they had dug themselves, looking up at the sky, slowly realizing that no amount of additional digging was going to change the contents of the note. This is where the episode ends, and this is where the open questions begin. Malloy escaped from Springfield custody in the 5th season of the show. He has not appeared in any episode since. He was never recaptured on screen. No follow-up story brought him back to Springfield. No later episode mentioned his capture elsewhere, his death, his retirement from crime, or any update on his status at all. Within the world of Springfield, the Springfield cat burglar escaped from jail, left a note in a box under a tree, and is still out there. The world's largest cubic zirconia was stolen from the Springfield Museum during Homer's watch. When Malloy returned the stolen goods from the crime wave, he returned personal items taken from private homes. There is no mention of the cubic zirconia being among the returned items. It was taken from a public institution. Its fate within the fiction of Springfield is never addressed. Malloy's business card said he had been operating since the 1970s. The Springfield crime wave shown in the episode represented a very small window of his work, a few nights, maybe a week. 20 years of prior theft across however many locations was never investigated, never accounted for, never traced. Springfield got its necklaces and saxophones back. Whatever Malloy had taken from wherever he had been before Springfield remained gone. There is also a question sitting underneath all of this that the episode never asks directly, but the structure of the story makes unavoidable. Malloy lived in the Springfield Retirement Castle. The retirement castle was a place where people ended up when they had nowhere else to be, when family situations had become complicated, when the later years of life required a specific kind of institutional care. Malloy was charming and elegant and completely out of place. He operated from that location because it was the safest cover imaginable. Nobody checks the elderly. Nobody suspects a pleasant old man. Nobody thinks to look for stolen goods in a retirement home room. But he was also there long enough that Grandpa noticed things, long enough that the room was full of loot, long enough that his routines were observable. He had built a stable enough life inside the retirement castle that he could hide in plain sight for however long it took. What he was doing before Springfield and where he went after are the two halves of a story the show opened and never closed. The cat burglar had been in Springfield before the show began, operating quietly while every other story in town unfolded around him. He was there during the early seasons, during all of it, invisible and working, leaving his cards at crime scenes that apparently went unreported or unconnected until the night Homer woke up and found his house had been robbed. Then he said goodbye with a note in a box, stepped out of a jail that nobody was watching, and walked away from Springfield the same way he had spent 2 decades operating inside it, without anyone seeing him go. The case, within Springfield's fiction, is still open. No arrest record, no updated status, no resolution. Just a business card somewhere in a filing cabinet at the Springfield Police Department, and a hole in the ground outside of town where a crowd dug for treasure that was never there. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in Springfield is the opposite in almost every way. No charming criminal, no polite note, no elegant escape. Just a glowing figure in the woods, a terrified man running home through the dark, and a mystery that the show solved out loud while quietly leaving the real question completely unanswered. Section 3. The Alien in the Woods. The Mystery. Springfield thought it solved. It started with 10 beers and a wrong turn. Homer Simpson left Moe's Tavern on a Friday night, failed a breathalyzer test when a police officer stopped him outside, and was forced to walk home. He took a path through the woods rather than the main road. This detail matters because without the wrong turn, without the 10 beers, without the failed breathalyzer test sending him on foot into a part of Springfield he would never normally walk through at night, nothing that follows happens at all. The encounter that would consume the entire town for 3 consecutive Fridays began because Homer Simpson could not pass a basic sobriety test and decided to cut through the trees. In a clearing in those woods, Homer saw something, a figure, thin, glowing green, with wide eyes and a body that did not move the way a human body moves. The figure spoke. It said, quietly and directly, "Don't be afraid." Homer was afraid. Homer ran home screaming. The next morning at breakfast, Homer told his family what he had seen. The family responded the way the family always responds to Homer's stranger announcements, with patient, exhausted disbelief. Marge did not believe him. Bart did not believe him. Lisa did not believe him. Homer went to the Springfield police, and Chief Wiggum did not believe him either. The town, when word got out, did not believe him. Springfield's default response to Homer Simpson claiming to have seen something extraordinary is to assume Homer Simpson is wrong, and on most occasions, that assumption is correct. This time, the FBI got involved. Special Agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully arrived in Springfield. These are the 2 main characters from the television show The X-Files, which in 1997 was one of the most popular programs on American television. The episode is a formal crossover between The Simpsons and The X-Files, with David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson providing the voices for their own characters. Chris Carter, who created The X-Files, was sent the script before production and said it was an honor to be included in a Simpsons episode. The crossover was real, the voices were real, and the investigation that followed was treated, within the fiction of Springfield, as a genuine federal inquiry into a possible alien encounter. Mulder and Scully put Homer through a series of tests. They checked his reflexes, which took an unusually long time to produce any response. They put him on a treadmill in his underwear and watched him run. Mulder observed that Homer's movement was almost hypnotic to watch. Scully noted that he could stand to lose some weight. The tests were not productive in terms of establishing whether Homer had seen an alien, but they confirmed that Homer was at least a real person with a consistent and coherent account of what he believed he had seen. The problem for the investigation was that the woods produced nothing. No physical evidence, no tracks, no sign of anything unusual. Mulder and Scully came up empty. The one witness was a man whose credibility the town had already decided was limited, and the location of the sighting showed nothing that could support his story. Then Homer said something important. He told Bart that the creature appeared every Friday night. This is a detail the episode itself acknowledges as strange. At no point before this moment had anyone established that the creature followed a schedule. Homer had seen it once on a Friday. He had not seen it a second time. He had not compared notes with anyone who had seen it on other Fridays. He simply knew, somehow, without having confirmed it, that the creature came back every Friday. The episode flags this as a plot hole through a gag, and then moves past it without resolving it. Within the fiction of the episode, Homer's knowledge of the weekly schedule is never explained. Homer and Bart went back to the woods the following Friday with a video camera. The creature appeared. Homer and Bart filmed it. The footage ran on the local news and became a sensation. Springfield, which had spent a week mocking Homer for his story, suddenly had to contend with recorded evidence of a glowing humanoid figure in the local woods. Merchandise appeared almost immediately. 2 different t-shirts went on sale, one reading "Homer is a dope" and one reading "Homer was right." The "Homer is a dope" shirt sold out faster. The following Friday, the entire town showed up. Hundreds of Springfield residents gathered in and around the clearing where Homer had originally made his sighting. The energy in the crowd was a mixture of genuine curiosity, the desire to see something extraordinary, and the specific kind of excitement that comes from an entire community being focused on the same thing at the same time. Some people were there because they believed. Some were there because they wanted to prove they did not believe. All of them were there. The creature appeared. The crowd moved toward it. Several people in the group were close to becoming violent in their excitement. Then Wayland Smithers stepped forward and stopped them. Smithers identified the creature as Mr. Burns. His explanation, delivered to the crowd, was this. Mr. Burns received a medical treatment every week. The treatment was described as including intense adjustment of his spine, the administering of eye drops and painkillers, and a scraping of his vocal cords. The treatment kept Burns alive. He was old enough and fragile enough that without it, he would not survive. But the treatment left him in a temporary state of confusion and physical alteration. His voice became soft and high-pitched from the vocal cord procedure. His movements became slow and unsteady, and his skin, after decades of working in his nuclear power plant, glowed green from radiation exposure. Exposure that had also, Burns himself casually mentioned while briefly returning to his normal state, left him unable to have children. The treatment happened every Friday. Burns wandered the woods every Friday afterward in his altered state, disoriented and temporarily transformed by what had been done to him. The creature Homer had seen, filmed, and brought the entire town out to witness was Montgomery Burns on his weekly medical appointment. The crowd accepted this. The episode ended with everyone linking arms and singing a song together, including Leonard Nimoy, who had been narrating the episode as the host of a program about alien encounters. Mulder and Scully reappeared briefly in the crowd, Scully wearing a "Homer is a dope" t-shirt. The mystery was declared closed. Nimoy wrapped up his narration by saying that, from this simple man came the truth that the town was not alone in the universe. Then the teenager working the closing announcement told viewers to keep watching the skies, mispronounced it badly, and the episode ended. But the DVD commentary for this episode contains something worth sitting with. The writers stated directly that the original ending of the episode was different. In the original version, the creature's identity was going to be left as a genuine mystery, with strong suggestions that Homer had really seen an alien. The Burns explanation was a late decision, made because the production team felt the story needed a cleaner resolution. The alien ending was the first version. The Burns reveal came later. This means the show itself was uncertain about what Homer saw. The creative team wrote 2 different answers and chose one of them. The other answer, the one where the creature stays unexplained, existed as a real version of this story. Within the fiction of Springfield, the Burns explanation was accepted by the crowd because Smithers said it and Burns confirmed it in a brief moment of clarity. But no scientific test confirmed that Burns's condition produces a visible green glow that matches the filmed footage. No doctor examined the footage and matched it to Burns's known medical state. The crowd heard an explanation that was plausible and stopped asking questions. There is also the problem of what Burns said. When Burns briefly came back to his normal self during the confrontation with the crowd, before receiving another injection that returned him to his altered state, he did not express peace or love. He threatened to bring fear, famine, and pestilence to the people of Springfield. This is not the behavior of a confused old man wandering the woods in a medical fog. This is Burns. But the statement was made and then immediately chemically reversed by the injection, and the crowd, already moving toward acceptance of Smithers' explanation, did not appear to process it as significant. The FBI case files from Mulder and Scully's investigation were never shown being officially closed. Mulder and Scully left Springfield apparently unconvinced and definitely without a confirmed resolution. The episode does not show them accepting the Burns explanation. They simply reappear in the crowd at the end, which suggests they were present for the confrontation, but their professional conclusion on the case is never stated. And then there is the original question that started everything. How did Homer know the creature came back every Friday? He saw it once. He walked home, told his family, was not believed, went to the police, was not believed, and somehow knew with enough confidence to tell Bart that they should return the following Friday specifically, not Saturday, not the following week at some unspecified point, Friday. The episode acknowledges this is strange and then does not answer it. Mulder and Scully do not address it. The crowd does not address it. Smithers' explanation of Burns' weekly treatment schedule actually makes Homer's knowledge more confusing rather than less, because it would require Homer to have independently known something about Burns' medical schedule that was apparently a closely kept secret. Smithers describes the treatment as something Burns undergoes privately, not something publicly known about his routine. Homer simply knew. The show never said how. Leonard Nimoy's closing narration frames the whole story as a resolved alien encounter that turned out to be something mundane. The language he uses, that from this simple man came the truth, that they were not alone in the universe, is the language of confirmation. Something was found. A mystery was closed. Nimoy then leaves the shot before the full explanation is complete, which is consistent with his established character in the episode. He is narrating a show about genuinely unexplained phenomena and seems slightly disappointed by the rational answer. The show framed the Burns explanation as funny and satisfying and moved on. The alternative ending, the one where the creature stays unexplained, where Homer really did see something in the woods, was written and considered seriously before being set aside. Springfield accepted Smithers' word for what Homer saw. The FBI filed their paperwork and left. The merchandise stopped selling. The clearing in the woods went back to being an ordinary patch of trees. Every Friday night, somewhere in those same woods, a medical procedure is performed on an extremely old and extremely radioactive man, who then wanders alone in the dark in a confused state until the effects wear off. Whatever Homer saw that first night, however it looked, whatever it said, however it moved, walked back into those trees, and the town decided it already knew the answer. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in Springfield is different from anything else on this list because the crime was witnessed by an entire neighborhood over an entire summer, investigated by a 10-year-old with a broken leg and a telescope, and solved in a way that left one small detail completely unexplained. A detail that the person at the center of the case admitted on camera he could not account for. Section 4. The alleged murder of Maud Flanders. The scream Ned could not explain. Springfield had a heat wave. That is where this starts. Not with a crime, not with a body, not with a mystery, but with a summer so hot that the Simpsons family ended up with a backyard swimming pool
bill they could not really afford, which led to Bart breaking his leg jumping from the treehouse, which led to Bart being confined to his bedroom for the rest of the summer,
which led to Lisa giving Bart her telescope to keep him occupied, which led to Bart pointing that telescope at the house next door and watching Ned Flanders do something that looked, from a distance, exactly like murder. The chain of small things that produce this situation is worth understanding because the episode never pretends the setup is subtle. A heat wave, a pool, a dare, a broken bone, a telescope. Each thing follows the last in a line so direct it almost feels designed. And the result was a 10-year-old boy with a cast on his leg becoming convinced over several days that the most aggressively friendly man in Springfield had killed his wife. Bart had been watching the neighborhood through the telescope and finding very little of interest. The universe, he concluded after scanning it briefly, was boring. He turned the telescope towards Springfield instead. He watched his neighbors go about their lives. He found nothing worth watching until one afternoon when he heard a scream from the direction of the Flanders house. A female scream coming from inside. Bart looked. He could not identify the source. He kept watching. Over the following days, evidence accumulated in the way that evidence accumulates when a person is already primed to find something. The next thing Bart saw was Ned Flanders in his backyard at night, digging. Ned was not digging in the casual way a person digs when they are gardening or fixing a sprinkler. He was digging a hole the size and shape of a grave. And while he dug, he talked to himself. He called himself a murderer. The word came out of Ned Flanders, a man who said diddly instead of anything even slightly impolite, a man whose worst exclamation was gosh or gee or something that rhymed with them. And Bart heard it clearly through the window. Then Ned covered the hole and went back inside. The next day, Bart heard Ned talking to his sons, Rod and Todd. Ned told them that their mother was with God. He told them that soon they would be joining her. Bart had a theory. The theory was that Ned Flanders had murdered Maud, buried her in the backyard, and was now planning to murder his own children. This theory was incorrect in every specific detail, but based strictly on the observable evidence available to a boy with a broken leg and a telescope, it was not an unreasonable conclusion to reach. The scream was real. The digging was real. The grave-shaped hole was real. Ned calling himself a murderer was real. Ned telling his children their mother was with God was real. Bart told his family. Nobody believed him. This was, in fairness to the family, a reasonable response. Bart had a documented history of creating trouble where none existed, and the idea that Ned Flanders had murdered his wife was not the kind of claim that invited immediate acceptance from people who knew both Bart and Ned. Homer dismissed it. Marge was concerned about Bart's mental state after weeks alone in his room. The isolation and the heat had clearly gotten to him. Lisa eventually paid attention. She had lost her own popularity after Martin Prince set up a larger pool in his backyard, and the neighborhood children abandoned her for the bigger attraction. With nothing else demanding her focus, she listened to Bart's account and looked at what he had seen. She was skeptical in the same way she is always skeptical, carefully, with specific questions, but she agreed to help. The plan was straightforward. While Ned was away from the house, Lisa would go inside and look for evidence. Bart would watch from his window with the telescope and warn her if anything changed. Lisa got inside the Flanders house without difficulty. She moved through the rooms looking for anything that confirmed or denied Bart's theory. She found normal things in normal places. The house of a deeply religious, extremely organized man who kept everything exactly where it belonged. Then she opened the freezer. Inside the freezer was a green bag with the words "human head" printed on it. Lisa stared at it. Bart stared at it through the telescope. Several seconds passed. Then Lisa wiped more frost from the label. The full text read, Schumann Farms Head of Lettuce. It was a brand of lettuce. The bag was full of frozen vegetables. But for those several seconds, standing in Ned Flanders' kitchen, the evidence had looked exactly like what Bart had been warning about. Then Ned came home early. He was carrying an axe. This was not a small, decorative axe. This was a full axe, carried in one hand, brought into the house without particular ceremony by a man who had just been declared a murderer by the boy watching from across the yard. Lisa heard the door. She moved. She found the attic stairs, pulled the cord, and climbed up before Ned reached the second floor. She got behind a trunk next to a bird cage and waited in the dark. Ned followed her up. He pulled the attic cord. He climbed the stairs. He moved through the attic toward Lisa's hiding spot with the axe visible in his hand. His shadow climbed the wall ahead of him. He was humming Mary Had a Little Lamb quietly as he walked. Lisa pressed herself against the trunk and prepared for whatever was about to happen. Bart, watching from across the yard, understood that his sister was about to be killed by the same man who had already killed Maud. He made a decision. Cast on his leg, trash can stuck to his foot, a hose attached to the trash can, a large piece of sod somehow incorporated into the whole arrangement, Bart dragged himself across the lawn and through the Flanders front door. He arrived in the attic at the same moment Ned reached Lisa. Ned raised the axe. He brought it up with the specific motion of a man about to strike something. He said the words, "It is time to put you away. Put you away for good." Lisa screamed. Bart screamed. Ned placed the axe on a wall-mounted rack designed specifically for holding an axe. He had been putting away a tool. He had gone to the attic to return an axe to its storage mount. He turned around and found two Simpson children in his attic. One of them in a full leg cast, somehow dragging a trash can and a length of garden hose. He was confused, then startled. Then he heard Bart's accusation. Bart told him directly he had come to stop Ned from murdering Lisa the way he had murdered Maud. Ned Flanders heard this and fainted. When he came around, the police were there, and so was Maud. She had been at Bible camp for a week, learning to be more judgmental in the Christian tradition. Her description, offered with complete sincerity. She had not been murdered. She had not been in danger. She had been at a religious retreat in the countryside and come home to find police officers in her backyard. Ned explained the digging. Maud had a favorite ficus plant, a houseplant she kept and cared for over a long period of time. While she was away, Ned had been responsible for watering it. He had watered it too much. The plant died. Ned, in the specific emotional logic of a man who is devoted to his wife and deeply distressed by the idea of letting her down in even a small way, decided he could not simply throw the dead plant in the trash. He dug a grave for it in the backyard. He buried it. He planned to replace the plant before Maud got home, so she would never know what had happened. While he was doing this, he had said the word murderer to himself. He was the murderer of the plant. The word applied technically to what he had done to the ficus. Bart had heard it and applied it to Maud. The police dug up the grave. They found the ficus. The dead, overwatered plant was removed from its hole and examined while Ned watched. And when Ned saw what they had unearthed, his buried ficus, his secret, the thing he had been trying to hide from his wife, he let out a scream, a high-pitched scream, coming from Ned Flanders, sounding to anyone listening from a distance exactly like a woman's voice. Bart recognized it immediately. That was the scream he had heard weeks earlier through the telescope. That was the first piece of evidence. The female scream from the Flanders house had always been Ned, the specific pitch of Ned Flanders' most distressed vocalization, which the show deliberately recorded using Tress MacNeille rather than Harry Shearer so that it would not be recognizable as Ned's voice to the audience any more than it had been recognizable to Bart. The mystery was solved. all of it tied together cleanly. The scream was Ned. The grave was for a plant. The axe went on the wall. Maud was alive and slightly judgmental from a week of Christian education. Homer arrived and made a sarcastic remark. The case was closed. The episode ended with Martin Prince's pool collapsing under the weight of too many children, Nelson stealing Martin's swim trunks, and Martin standing alone in the wreckage, singing quietly to himself as the sun went down. But Ned said one thing before the explanation was fully complete. Bart asked about the female scream. Specifically, the original one, the first thing he had heard through the window, the sound that started the whole investigation. Ned heard the question and said, plainly and directly, that he could not explain that. Then the police dug up the ficus. Then Ned screamed in that same pitch again, and everyone connected it. The second scream explained the first. The sound matched. Bart recognized it. The case closed. But Ned said he could not explain it before the second scream happened. Within the episode's own dialogue, the person at the center of the mystery stated on camera that one part of the evidence was beyond his ability to account for. The resolution, the second scream matching the first, happened immediately after, which the audience accepts as the explanation. The sounds were the same, they came from the same person, the case was closed. Ned's statement that he could not explain the original scream is still in the episode. It was not cut, it was not walked back. It sits in the dialogue between the accusation and the resolution, a small window of acknowledged uncertainty that the second scream then covers over. Whether the writers intended it as a loose end, a throwaway moment before the payoff, or something they noticed and left in deliberately, is not something any commentary or interview has clarified. What is clear within the canon of the episode is this. The man who was investigated for murder, in the moment before his complete innocence was confirmed, told the people questioning him that there was one part of the case he could not account for. Then the case closed anyway. Springfield moved on. Bart got his cast off eventually. Summer ended. The ficus stayed buried in the Flanders backyard. Maud never found out what happened to it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in Springfield involves a criminal who did not hide, did not use a false identity, and did not try particularly hard to avoid being caught, because he was caught, convicted, sentenced, and released so many times that the question stopped being who did it and became something much harder to answer. Why does Springfield keep letting him out? Section 5. The Sideshow Bob Problem. Springfield's longest-running failure. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. had a plan. The plan was to frame Krusty the Clown for armed robbery, take over the television program, use the platform to improve the cultural and intellectual standards of Springfield's children, and in doing so transform the town into something better than it currently was. This plan required committing a serious crime against a person he worked with. It required careful setup, patient execution, and the specific cruelty of watching an innocent man get arrested for something he did not do. Sideshow Bob carried it out without apparent hesitation and came very close to getting away with it completely. He did not get away with it. A 10-year-old boy figured out the truth. That 10-year-old boy was Bart Simpson, and the fact that Bart Simpson is the person who stopped Sideshow Bob the first time matters enormously to everything that came after. Bob is one of the most intelligent characters in the show's entire run. He has a doctorate, he reads, he quotes poetry and opera. He has, across more than 30 years of appearances, demonstrated a level of planning and patience and raw cleverness that almost no other Springfield character can match. The one consistent obstacle between Bob and success in every scheme he has ever attempted is a 10-year-old boy who eats cereal for breakfast and gets detention on a regular basis. This is the central fact of Sideshow Bob's existence in Springfield, and it never gets less strange no matter how many times it repeats. Start at the beginning. Krusty Gets Busted aired on April 29, 1990. It was the 12th episode of the first season. Bob had been Krusty's silent sidekick on the Krusty the Clown show, a large, elaborately made-up character who stood in the background and took pies to the face and never said anything of significance. He had been there the whole first season in the background, unnoticed. Then he framed Krusty for robbing the Quickie Mart at gunpoint. The evidence against Krusty looked solid. He was identified at the scene, he was arrested, he was convicted, his show was taken off the air and replaced with the program hosted by Sideshow Bob, who had, with Krusty gone, the entire platform to himself. Bob used it to improve the quality of children's television in the way he had apparently always wanted to. He read to children. He elevated the material. He was, by every visible measure, doing exactly what he had planned to do. Bart did not believe Krusty was guilty. The specific detail that troubled Bart was that Krusty, who had been identified using the television in the Quickie Mart during the robbery, could not actually operate a television. Krusty was illiterate. He could not read the controls. But the robber at the Quickie Mart had changed the channel during the crime. Krusty could not have done that. Someone who was pretending to be Krusty, and who did not know Krusty could not read, would not have known to avoid operating the television. Bart brought this to Chief Wiggum. Wiggum did not act on it. Bart kept pushing. Eventually, at a live taping of Sideshow Bob's new show, Bart got Bob to remove his oversized clown shoes and revealed that Bob's feet were the same size as the footprints left at the robbery. Bob had been wearing Krusty's shoes to commit the crime. The disguise had been perfect, except for that one physical detail, and once the shoes came off, the whole thing unraveled in front of a live studio audience. Bob was arrested. He was convicted. He went to prison. This is where the pattern begins. Bob was convicted of framing Krusty, sent to prison, and eventually released. He came back. The second major crime came in Season 3, Episode 21. Black Widower aired on April 9, 1992. Bob had, while in prison, begun writing letters to Selma Bouvier, Marge's sister, a woman who worked at the DMV and had been unlucky in relationships. The letters were charming. Selma responded. A relationship developed through correspondence. Bob was released from prison. He and Selma got engaged. They got married. They went on a honeymoon. Bart was suspicious from the moment Bob reappeared in Springfield. He watched, he paid attention, he noticed things. On the honeymoon, in a hotel room, Bart was able to figure out that Bob had arranged for Selma to die from the gas coming from a faulty vent in the room. A gas she would not smell because she always smoked a cigarette after watching her favorite television program, and the cigarette would ignite the gas and kill her. The timing was deliberate. The setup was careful. Bob had planned it with the patience of someone who had spent months in prison with nothing to do except read and think and plan. Bart figured it out in time. Selma survived. Bob was arrested again. 2 convictions, 2 imprisonments, 2 releases. The case for keeping Bob incarcerated was not complicated. He had framed an innocent man and then attempted to murder a woman he had married specifically to kill her. These are not minor offenses. These are the kinds of crimes that, in any functioning legal system, produce sentences that keep a person away from the general public for a very long time. Springfield's legal system released him. He came back. Season 6, Episode 5. Sideshow Bob Roberts aired on October 9, 1994. Bob had been released again and become involved in Springfield politics. Through a series of events involving Mayor Quimby and a conservative radio host named Birch Barlow, Bob was released from prison early and eventually ran for mayor of Springfield against Quimby. He won the election by an enormous margin. He had won through voter fraud. The names on the voting rolls included people who had been dead for years, including one person who had died in 1909. Springfield's entire deceased population had somehow cast ballots for Sideshow Bob. Lisa and Bart investigated, found the evidence, brought it forward, and Bob was arrested and removed from office. 3 convictions, 3 imprisonments, 3 releases. The nature of Bob's crimes was escalating with each return. The first was fraud against one person. The second was attempted murder of one person. The third was the corruption of an entire Democratic election. Each crime was larger in scope than the last. Each conviction was followed by a release that returned him to Springfield and allowed him to attempt something worse. Season 7, Episode 9. Sideshow Bob's Last Gleaming aired on November 26, 1995. Bob, having escaped from a minimum security prison, took control of a nuclear weapon at a military air show and threatened to detonate it unless all television in Springfield was permanently shut down. His stated reasoning was that television was destroying human culture and that the threat of mass death was a reasonable response to the existence of bad programming. He had a nuclear weapon. He was prepared to use it. The only thing that stopped him was a specific accident of circumstance involving Bart and a television broadcast of Krusty that Bob could not bring himself to detonate the weapon through. The military recovered the situation. Bob was arrested, 4 convictions, 4 imprisonments. A man who had attempted to murder someone, corrupted an election, and threatened an entire town with nuclear destruction had now been arrested 4 times and was apparently still eligible for release each time. There are more. The list of Bob's documented crimes across the full run of the show is long, and each entry is supported by a specific episode with a specific air date. He attempted to frame Bart for the murder of Principal Skinner by manipulating a court case in Italy. He attempted to kill the entire Simpson family with a bomb built into their new house. He murdered his own father as part of a scheme to frame Bart for the crime. This is his only confirmed completed murder within the show's canon, occurring in Season 19, Episode 8, Funeral for a Fiend, which aired November 25, 2007. The father's death is the detail that the show's larger narrative does almost nothing with. Bob's father was an elderly man who was brought into a scheme he may not have fully understood, manipulated into a position where his death served his son's plan, and then killed. The scheme was uncovered. Bob was convicted again. But the specific loss of Bob's father, a death caused directly by Bob himself, vanishes from the show's ongoing story almost immediately. It is not mourned in subsequent episodes. It does not become a point of reflection for Bob in his later appearances. It exists in the episode, and then the show moves past it. The murder of Bob's father is Springfield's most straightforwardly documented homicide by a known perpetrator, and it produced the least sustained response of any major crime in the show's history. Bob's brother Cecil is also worth noting here. Cecil Terwilliger, voiced by David Hyde Pierce in a deliberate pairing with Kelsey Grammer, since the 2 actors played brothers on Frasier, appeared in Season 8, Episode 16, Brother from Another Series, which aired February 23, 1997. Cecil had been working as the chief contractor on the construction of a new dam for Springfield. He had been embezzling the construction funds, building a substandard dam that would fail, and planning to be far away when Springfield flooded. Bob, who was involved in a work release program connected to the project, discovered the plan and tried to stop it. Bart and Lisa also uncovered it. Cecil was arrested. The charge against Cecil was the attempted murder of everyone in Springfield simultaneously through deliberate structural negligence. He had built a dam designed to fail over a populated area. Every person living downstream was a potential victim. He was convicted and imprisoned. He has appeared in later episodes as if this history is simply background information about a person who served his time and moved on. The scale of what Cecil attempted, mass casualties through infrastructure failure, is referenced occasionally as a fact about his past, rather than treated as the defining event it would be for any real person or any real legal system. What makes the Sideshow Bob case different from every other case in this document is that the crimes are not mysteries. Nothing about Bob's guilt is uncertain. Every conviction was based on solid evidence. Every crime was committed in full view of witnesses, investigated properly, and prosecuted correctly. Springfield did everything right in terms of identifying and convicting Sideshow Bob. The system failed in the space between conviction and release. Bob has been convicted of 1 count of framing an innocent person for armed robbery, 1 count of attempted murder through gas exposure, 1 count of election fraud on a massive scale involving the votes of deceased residents, 1 count of threatening mass casualties with a nuclear weapon, multiple counts of attempted murder against Bart Simpson specifically, 1 count of attempted murder against the entire Simpson family, 1 count of attempted murder in Italy, and 1 confirmed, completed murder. He has been released after every imprisonment except the most recent appearances in the show. He has returned to Springfield after every release. He has, with the exception of his son Luigi in a later season, never managed to fully remove Bart Simpson from the equation. The boy who first caught him in Season 1 has been the obstacle to every plan he has attempted since. The question the show never formally answers is not whether Bob is guilty. The question is what Springfield's legal system believes it is doing when it releases him. No episode has ever shown a parole hearing that explains the reasoning. No judge has ever offered a justification. No politician has campaigned on the Sideshow Bob problem. No newspaper has run an investigation into the pattern of conviction and release that has defined Springfield's most documented criminal career. Springfield does not have a good relationship with accountability. That is the thread running through every case in this collection, and it is worth pausing on here because the Sideshow Bob situation makes it more visible than anywhere else. Because taken individually, each of Bob's convictions looks like the system working. Crime committed, criminal caught, justice delivered. The arrest happens, the trial happens, the sentence happens. Every procedural step that is supposed to happen does happen, in the correct order with the correct result. Springfield's justice system, on paper, functions exactly the way it is supposed to function every single time Bob appears in front of a judge, and then it releases him. This is what separates the Bob case from every other failure in this collection. Burns was never charged. Malloy escaped before sentencing could mean anything. Maud's case was never opened. These are failures that happened before the system engaged. Bob's failures happen after the system has already done everything right. The conviction is real. The evidence is solid. The sentence is handed down by a functioning court in front of witnesses. Springfield did its job. Then Springfield undid its job. There is no episode that explains the reasoning behind any of Bob's releases. No parole board scene where someone argues that Bob has been rehabilitated and deserves another chance. No politician running on a platform of criminal justice that accidentally frees him. No paperwork error, no expired warrant, no technicality that a sharp lawyer exploits. He simply goes in and comes out, goes in and comes out, with the same consistency that the lake behind the nuclear plant receives waste through the same pipe every single day. The system that catches Sideshow Bob is the same system that keeps handing him back to Springfield. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in Springfield is the only one on this list where the crime happened in front of hundreds of witnesses. The victim was named, the location was established, the mechanism was clear, and still, in the 35 years since it happened, no investigation was ever opened, no one was ever questioned, and no official in Springfield ever asked the single most obvious question about how a person dies at a public event event with that many people watching. Section 6. The Death of Maud Flanders. The case nobody opened. Maud Flanders died at a NASCAR race. That sentence contains more information than Springfield ever officially processed. A woman died at a public sporting event, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, struck by objects fired from a machine, operated by a person whose name the episode never provides, and the town of Springfield treated the entire thing as a tragic accident, held a funeral, and moved on. No investigation was opened. No one was questioned. No one who operated the t-shirt cannon that killed her was ever identified on screen, held responsible, or even mentioned by name in the episode or any episode that followed. Maud Flanders died in Season 11, Episode 14. Alone Again Natura Diddley aired on February 13th, 2000. The episode opens at the Springfield Speedway, where the Simpsons and the Flanders families have gone to watch a NASCAR race together. The two families sit in the grandstand. Between races, a promotional event takes place on the track below. Female models standing near a cannon fire t-shirts into the crowd. Homer, seated in the row, sees the models and leans forward. One of them asks if anyone wants a t-shirt. Homer raises his hand. Several t-shirts are loaded into the cannon. The cannon fires. Homer ducks. The shirts fly over the spot where Homer was sitting and strike Maud Flanders, who was standing in the row just behind him. The force knocks her backward and off the grandstand. She falls. She dies from the fall. This is the complete sequence of events as shown in the episode. It happens quickly. The camera does not linger on the mechanics of it. One moment Maud is standing in the grandstand at a NASCAR race on a Sunday afternoon. The next moment she is gone. Ned Flanders turns around and she is not there. The episode shifts immediately into Ned's grief, which becomes the central story of the hour. His loss, his attempt to move forward, his disastrous series of encounters with women who are not Maud and cannot be Maud. Maud Flanders had been a recurring character since the first season of the show. She appeared at neighborhood gatherings, at church, at school events, in scenes with Ned that established her as a genuine part of his life rather than a background prop. She had opinions. She was devout. She was, in the specific way that Ned's world was constructed, the person who made that world make sense. Her death was not a minor adjustment to the show's supporting cast. It was the removal of a character who had been present since the beginning. The episode never names the person who operated the cannon. The models who were standing near it are not identified. The company that operated the promotional event at the Speedway is not named. The Springfield Speedway itself, the venue that hosted an event resulting in a spectator's death, faces no visible consequence within the episode or any subsequent episode. In a real situation, the death of a spectator at a public sporting event caused by equipment operated by staff at that event would immediately produce a chain of official responses. The venue would be investigated. The equipment would be examined. The people operating it would be questioned. Some form of legal proceeding would follow, whether criminal or civil. The family of the person who died would have legal options available to them. These are not exotic or unusual outcomes. They are the basic responses that exist specifically for situations like the one the episode depicts. None of them happen in Springfield. Ned Flanders does not pursue any legal action against the Speedway. He does not pursue any action against the promotional company. He does not file any kind of complaint or claim related to the circumstances of his wife's death. He grieves. He prays. He tries to date again. He struggles. He eventually remarries in a later season. The Speedway continues to operate in Springfield without any indication that a woman died there. Homer Simpson is present at the moment the cannon fires. Homer is the person the shirts were aimed at. Homer is the person whose duck redirected the force of the cannon's output toward Maud. Homer is never questioned about his role in the sequence of events. He attends the funeral. He feels bad. He tries to help Ned in the ways that Homer tries to help people, which is to say with good intentions and inconsistent results. But the specific physical fact of Homer ducking, the action that moved him out of the path of the shirts and placed him below the trajectory that then carried those shirts into Maude, is never examined as part of any official process. This is not an accusation. A person ducking when objects are fired in their direction is a natural response. Homer did not fire the cannon. Homer did not choose to be seated where he was seated. Homer did not ask the promotional models to load the cannon with the specific force and angle that sent shirts over his position and into the row behind him. The duck was instinct, not malice. But the fact that the duck happened, combined with the fact that Maude died as a direct result of the shirt's new trajectory, makes Homer a material witness to the circumstances of her death at minimum. In any real investigation, the first person questioned would be the person who was in the original target zone when the fatal discharge occurred. That person is Homer. Homer was never questioned. Chief Wiggum does not appear in the episode in any investigative capacity. The Springfield Police Department has no visible presence at the Speedway following the incident. There is no crime scene. There is no evidence collection. There is no witness statement process. The episode moves directly from the event to the funeral, treating the space between as settled. An accident happened, a woman died, and now the story is about the man she left behind. Ned's sons Rod and Todd lost their mother that afternoon. They are shown in subsequent episodes processing that loss in the way children process loss when they have been raised in a household as specific as the Flanders household. Through prayer, through faith, through the particular emotional vocabulary Ned had built his family around. They never appear in a courtroom. They never appear in any proceeding related to the circumstances of their mother's death. The closest the show comes to addressing any formal response is Ned's grief, which is genuine and sustained across several episodes, and which never once expresses itself as a desire to understand who was responsible for operating the equipment that killed her. The t-shirt cannon itself is worth examining as a piece of the event. A cannon that fires shirts into a crowd at a sporting event is designed to be a promotional tool. It delivers merchandise to fans seated in distant rows who cannot easily receive items thrown by hand. The design requires a calculation of force and angle for each shot. The operator of the cannon has to aim it. The shirts do not fire randomly in all directions. They go where the cannon is pointed and with the force that the operator applies. Someone made decisions about where to aim the cannon before it fired the shirts that killed Maude Flanders. That person's name is not in the episode. That person's decision-making process is not in the episode. That person exists somewhere in the world of Springfield and has never been asked a single question about what happened. The promotional models are also present in the sequence. One of them asks if anyone wants a t-shirt directly before the cannon fires. Homer responds by raising his hand. The model's action and Homer's response are part of the causal chain that ends with Maude falling from the grandstand. The models are not identified. They do not appear in later episodes. They are promotional workers at a NASCAR event in Springfield who were present when a spectator died and were never mentioned again. The Springfield Speedway hosted this event. A venue has responsibilities when it allows promotional equipment to be operated inside it. The decision to allow a cannon to fire objects into the stands at a force sufficient to knock a standing adult backward off a grandstand is a decision made at some level of the venue's management. The Speedway made that decision. The result was a fatality in the grandstand. The Speedway continued to operate in Springfield without any visible consequence. There is one additional layer to the situation that the episode itself does not address, but that becomes relevant when the full context of the show is considered. Maude Flanders was voiced by Maggie Roswell, who had been providing the voice since the show's early seasons. In the period leading up to season 11, Roswell had moved to Denver to care for her father, who was ill. She requested that the show cover her travel costs for recording sessions, since she now lived in a different city. The show declined. Roswell left the production as a result. The show wrote Maude out of the series by killing her in the season 11 episode. The episode in which Maude died aired on February 13th, 2000, the Sunday before Valentine's Day. Within Springfield's fiction, the death is a tragic accident at a racetrack. The circumstances that produced the decision to write Maude out of the show existed entirely outside the fiction, in a contract disagreement between a voice actress and a production company. Roswell later pursued legal action against Fox over unpaid wages. The case was settled. None of this is part of the show's canon. It is the real-world explanation for a fictional death. But it produces a specific quality to the case that no other Springfield mystery shares. The death of Maude Flanders is the only major crime or incident in the show's history where the reason it happened, the actual cause of the event, not the fictional cause but the real one, has nothing to do with Springfield at all. Within the fiction, Maude died because Homer ducked. Within the production, Maude died because of a dispute over travel expenses. Springfield never investigated the first cause. The second cause was settled out of court. The grandstand at the Springfield Speedway still stands. The cannon that fired the shirts that killed Maude Flanders was presumably packed up and taken to the next venue after the event. The people who operated it drove away from Springfield on February 13th, 2000, within the show's internal timeline, and were never asked where they were going. Ned Flanders prayed for his wife's soul. He raised his sons alone. He eventually found love again and remarried in season 23. Maude became a memory, visited occasionally in dream sequences and flashbacks, treated with tenderness and respect by the show, mourned genuinely by the character who had loved her. The case that killed her was never opened. The investigation that should have followed her death never started. The questions that any official inquiry would have asked, who aimed the cannon, at what force, with what angle, with what training, under what supervision, remain unanswered within Springfield's canon. The person who operated the equipment that killed Maude Flanders on a Sunday afternoon in front of hundreds of people is the most anonymous figure connected to a death in the show's entire history. No name, no face, no consequence, no record. And that anonymity is not accidental. It is the natural result of a town that decided within minutes of Maude hitting the ground that what had happened was simply an unfortunate accident, closed the mental file on the question of responsibility, and redirected every available unit of emotional energy toward Ned Flanders' grief instead. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in Springfield is the only one where the crime was not a single event, but an accumulation. Decades of contamination, decades of visible damage, decades of mutated fish and green glowing water. And the man responsible sat in his office at the top of a nuclear plant and was never once formally charged for any of it. Section 7. The Poisoning of Springfield. Mr. Burns and the Lake Nobody Investigated. There is a pipe behind the Springfield nuclear power plant. It runs from the plant directly into the lake that sits behind it. Through that pipe, the plant pumps nuclear waste into the water. This is not a background detail or a throwaway visual gag that appears once and disappears. It is a consistent, established, repeated feature of Springfield's landscape that the show has shown across dozens of episodes spanning more than 3 decades. The pipe is there, the waste goes in, the lake receives it, and the fish that live in that lake, the fish that Springfield residents catch and sometimes eat, have for as long as the show has been running had extra eyes. 3 eyes, sometimes more. Visible, obvious, undeniable mutations from prolonged exposure to whatever comes out of that pipe. The fish have a name. Blinky, a 3-eyed fish named Blinky, became one of the most recognizable symbols of what the Springfield nuclear power plant does to the environment around it.
Blinky appeared in the episode 2 Cars in Every Garage and 3 Eyes on Every Fish, which aired on November 1st, 1990. That is Season 2,
Episode 4. Blinky was caught by Bart while fishing in the lake behind the plant. A reporter filmed the catch. The footage ran on the local news. A full investigation into the plant and its environmental impact followed, at least briefly. The investigation was political rather than criminal. Mr. Burns, facing the possibility of costly upgrades to the plant required by state environmental regulators, decided the most efficient solution was to run for governor of Illinois and change the regulations himself. He hired a team of people to improve his public image. He had himself filmed doing wholesome activities. He appeared in campaign materials designed to make him look like a man of the people, rather than the owner of a facility that had turned local fish into three-eyed mutations. Marge cooked Blinky for dinner the night Burns came to the Simpson home as part of his campaign. Blinky was served at the table. Burns could not eat it. He took one bite, choked on the texture and the implied reality of what he was being asked to consume. A fish his own plant had mutated, and spat it out. The campaign collapsed. Burns lost the election. The pipe kept pumping. The lake stayed contaminated. Blinky kept swimming. No criminal charge was ever filed against Burns or the plant for the contamination of the lake. The regulatory investigation that began with Bart's catch produced a political campaign and a lost election, but no legal consequence for the environmental damage itself. The state required upgrades. Burns fought the upgrades by running for governor. He lost. But the specific question of accountability for years of waste being pumped into a public waterway was never resolved through any court, any agency, or any formal process shown in the show. This is the baseline. The lake behind the plant is contaminated. This has been true since at least the second season of the show, which means it was true before the show began, within Springfield's internal timeline. The fish are mutated. The water is demonstrably affected. The source of the contamination is known, visible, and connected by a literal pipe to a specific building owned by a specific person. Montgomery Burns has owned and operated the Springfield nuclear power plant for longer than almost anyone in Springfield has been alive. The specific founding date of the plant and Burns's tenure within it have been addressed in various episodes through flashbacks. Burns has been connected to the plant since its early days of operation. The environmental damage to the lake is not something that happened under unclear ownership or ambiguous management. It happened under Burns, while Burns was in charge, through infrastructure that Burns controlled. The show has documented Burns's relationship with the plant and its safety record across many episodes. In Homer's Odyssey, which aired January 21st, 1990, Homer Simpson works at the plant and raises safety concerns about a specific danger zone. The plant's casual relationship with basic safety standards is established early and maintained consistently. The plant has had multiple near meltdowns across the show's run. Homer, as a safety inspector in Sector 7G, has prevented catastrophic failures on more than one occasion, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident, sometimes through a combination of both. The safety failures inside the plant and the environmental damage outside it exist in parallel. The plant is dangerous to work in and dangerous to live near. Both things are visible. Both things are documented within the show's fiction. Neither has produced a sustained legal consequence for Burns. In the Simpsons movie, released in 2007, the environmental situation around Springfield reaches a point where the Environmental Protection Agency becomes involved. Lake Springfield, the body of water connected to the plant, has been contaminated to the point where it becomes the central environmental crisis of the film. Homer Simpson contributes directly to the final tipping point by dumping a silo full of waste into the lake, which accelerates the contamination to a level that triggers federal intervention. The EPA, led by a government official named Russ Cargill, places a giant dome over the entire town of Springfield to contain what has become an environmental disaster zone. The dome is eventually destroyed. Springfield is eventually uncovered. The town recovers. but the sequence of events in the film makes clear that the lake's contamination was already severe before Homer added to it. The EPA did not intervene because of a sudden new pollution event. They intervened because the accumulated damage had finally crossed a threshold that demanded a response. Homer's contribution was the final addition to a lake that had been receiving the plant's output for decades. The crisis that produced the dome was the result of years of contamination, not hours. Burns's plant contributed to that accumulated contamination across the entire run of the show leading up to 2007. His pipe was pumping waste into that water during every season, every episode, every Springfield event depicted on screen. The lake that Homer tipped over the edge was already a lake that Burns had been filling with industrial waste for longer than most Springfield residents had been alive. Burns was not the primary focus of the dome crisis in the film. He appears throughout the movie, but the governmental response is directed at Springfield as a whole rather than at the plant specifically. The question of Burns's liability for the underlying contamination that made the lake vulnerable to Homer's final addition is not something the film addresses. After the dome comes down and Springfield rebuilds, the show returns to its regular format. The lake appears in subsequent episodes. The pipe behind the plant continues to be a feature of Springfield's geography. The fish with extra eyes continue to appear. The ongoing contamination of the lake is the longest-running unaddressed crime in Springfield's history. Not the longest investigated crime, not the longest suspected crime, but the longest crime that has been openly visible and never formally prosecuted across the full run of the show. 3 eyes on every fish. The visual returns again and again because the situation it represents never changes. The plant pumps, the lake receives, the fish mutate. Springfield goes about its business downstream. Residents fish in that lake. Bart fished in it and caught Blinky. Homer has fished in it across multiple episodes. The lake is treated as a normal feature of Springfield life. Contaminated, yes. Visibly damaged, yes. But normal in the way that things become normal when they have been present long enough. Burns himself has been directly connected to the plant's environmental output in ways beyond the lake. In the Springfield files, his own body carries the radiation from decades of working in the facility. His skin glows green. His medical team treats this as a routine part of his weekly maintenance. The radiation that is accumulated in Burns's body over the course of his career at the plant is the same radiation that is accumulated in the lake. He is, in a very specific physical sense, carrying the evidence of what the plant does to living things within his own cells. He finds this mildly inconvenient rather than alarming. The regulatory structure around the plant has been shown to be largely ineffective throughout the show. Inspectors arrive and find violations. Burns responds to violations with whatever approach costs him the least. He has avoided upgrades, delayed compliance, charmed regulators, and, on at least one occasion, attempted to influence the political process that controls the regulations themselves. Each individual regulatory interaction produces a small result, a fine, a required change, a temporary shutdown, but the larger pattern of environmental damage continues undisturbed. Homer's role as safety inspector is itself a comment on this dynamic. Homer did not become a safety inspector because he was qualified for the job or because he had sought it out. He got the position through a specific set of circumstances in an early episode and remained in it through inertia and the plant's apparent lack of concern about whether its safety inspector was capable of performing the job. The plant safety department is not a department that takes safety seriously. It is a box that needs to be checked so the plant can continue operating without appearing to be completely without oversight. The fish in the lake know the difference. Blinky became a cultural symbol partly because 3 eyes on a fish is impossible to ignore. You cannot look at a 3-eyed fish and pretend everything is fine. The mutation is too obvious, too direct, too clearly caused by something specific to pretend it happened naturally or randomly. Blinky does not have 3 eyes because of genetics or chance. Blinky has 3 eyes because of the pipe. The pipe is connected to the plant. The plant is owned by Burns.
That chain of causation was established in Season 2. It has never been seriously challenged by any Springfield official in any episode since. The fish keep swimming, the pipe keeps running, Burns keeps sitting in his office at the top of the plant, looking down at Springfield through whatever window faces the lake, and the water beneath that window is the color and clarity of a place that has been receiving industrial waste for decades. No charges, no prosecution.
No formal inquiry that extends beyond a regulatory fine, and a campaign that ended with Burns eating a 3-eyed fish and losing a governor's race. The contamination of the lake behind the Springfield nuclear power plant is the most visible, most documented, most consistently presented ongoing crime in the entire show. It is not a mystery in the traditional sense. The source is not unknown. The mechanism is not uncertain. The damage is not invisible. It is a crime that Springfield has decided to treat as a permanent condition of the town rather than as something that requires a response. Blinky is still in that lake. The water is still that color. The pipe is still connected, and somewhere in the accumulated case files of whatever environmental agency is supposed to be watching Springfield, there is a record of a fish with 3 eyes caught by a 10-year-old boy in 1990, photographed by a news crew, shown on television, and then quietly filed away while the lake went on being exactly what it had always been.
Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next mystery in Springfield is the only one that exists entirely in a single moment. A moment so short that the show moves past it almost before the audience realizes what just happened. A question asked, an answer half given, a sentence that stops in the middle of the most important word, and then silence. And a man standing in a driveway watching a van drive away with no idea what his mother had been about to tell him.
Section 8. Mona's Last Word. The sentence Homer never heard. Mona Simpson died with something unsaid. That is not a dramatic interpretation or a reading between the lines. It is exactly what the episode shows. She collapsed outside the Simpson home, was brought inside, said a sentence to Homer that stopped before it reached its last word, and then she was gone. The sentence was, Homer, I. 3 words and a pause, and then nothing. The show held on Homer's face for a moment, and then Mona Simpson was dead, and the thing she had been trying to tell her son went with her. This happened in Season 19, Episode 19. Mona Leavesa aired on May 11th, 2008. It was the last episode in which Mona Simpson appeared as a living character. Glenn Close, who had voiced Mona across multiple seasons and multiple appearances since her first major role in the Season 7 episode Mother Simpson, returned for this final time. The episode ends with a funeral. Homer stands at the grave. The family is around him. Mona is buried. Her last sentence is buried with her. The show never completed it. To understand why the incomplete sentence matters, it helps to understand who Mona Simpson was and what her history with Homer contained. Because the weight of those 3 words, Homer, I, comes directly from everything that came before them. Mona was first mentioned in the very first season of the show, in There's No Disgrace Like Home, which aired January 28, 1990. Homer recalled his mother telling him that he was a big disappointment. That is the earliest reference to her in the show's canon, a remembered criticism from a woman Homer believed was dead. She appeared briefly in flashbacks in Season 2's Oh Brother Where Art Thou and Season 6's Grandpa vs. Sexual Inadequacy inadequacy, but these were small moments with minimal dialogue. Her first full appearance came in Mother Simpson, Season 7, Episode 8, which aired November 19th, 1995. The episode was written by Richard Appel and directed by David Silverman. Glenn Close voiced her for the first time in this episode, and the creative team built the character carefully enough that Close agreed to return for multiple subsequent appearances across different seasons. The backstory established in Mother Simpson is specific and detailed. Mona had been a homemaker in Springfield in the 1960s, living with Abe Simpson and their son Homer. She became involved in political activism after being moved by what she saw happening in the world around her. In 1969, she joined a group of activists who broke into Mr. Burns's biological warfare laboratory, a facility where Burns was developing germ-based weapons. The group released what the episode calls an antibiotic bomb, which destroyed all the biological agents in the lab. As the group was escaping, Mona stayed behind to help Burns, who had fallen. Burns, rather than feeling grateful, recognized her and swore to have her imprisoned for the rest of her life. Mona went underground. She took on a series of false identities: Mona Simpson, Martha Stewart, Penelope Olson, Muddy May Suggins. She moved from place to place, staying ahead of Burns's reach and the federal charges connected to the lab break-in. She did not contact Homer. She did not contact Abe. She disappeared from their lives and stayed disappeared. Abe told Homer that his mother was dead. He made this choice, he explained when confronted, because the alternative was telling a child that his mother was a wanted criminal on the run from the law. He preferred Homer to grieve a dead mother than to grow up knowing the real story. Homer grew up believing his mother had died when he was young. He visited what he thought was her grave. The grave he visited was actually Walt Whitman's grave. Abe had been taking him to the wrong headstone for years, telling him it was Mona's. The reunion in Mother Simpson happened because Homer faked his own death to get out of a work obligation, which caused news of his death to reach Mona through the media, which caused her to travel to Springfield to visit what she believed was her son's grave. Homer fell into the grave by accident, his own freshly dug, fake grave, prepared by Patty and Selma. Mona arrived and found him in it. They recognized each other. They went home together. The week they spent as a family was the first time Homer had been with his mother since early childhood. Lisa bonded with her immediately. Mona represented the intellectual and social awareness that Lisa recognized in herself and rarely found in the rest of her family. Bart and Maggie responded to her warmly. Marge, who had lost her own mother and had longed for a real maternal relationship in her life, felt something open up in her that she had kept closed for a long time. Then Mr. Burns found out she was there. The FBI came. Mona had to run again. The goodbye at the end of Mother Simpson is one of the most carefully made moments in the show's history. Homer and Mona drove out to a desert location where her friends were waiting in a van to take her away. They sat together for a moment. Mona told Homer that whatever happened, he had a mother, and she was truly proud of him. Homer told her that at least this time he was awake for her goodbye, referencing the fact that the original time she left, when he was a child, he had been asleep and never got to say anything. She got into the van. The van drove away. Homer sat on the hood of his car and looked at the stars. The camera pulled back slowly. The closing music played. No commercial break was allowed to interrupt the credits, out of respect for the emotional weight of the scene, which the producers requested from the network, and the network honored. This is the episode that established who Mona was to Homer. Every subsequent appearance built on this foundation. She returned in My Mother the Carjacker in Season 15, and in How I Wet Your Mother in Season 23 as a dream version of herself. But the last real appearance, the last time Mona Simpson was alive within the fiction of Springfield, was Mona Leavesa in Season 19. In that episode, Mona returns to Springfield again. She has a plan to finally finish what she started decades ago, to complete the work against Burns's operations that had forced her into hiding in the first place. The specifics of the plan involve a missile that Burns had been developing, which Mona intends to redirect to destroy his newest harmful project. The plan works, she carries it out, but Burns, realizing what has happened, reports her location to the federal authorities. She is captured, arrested, and taken into custody. Homer, with the help of his family, breaks her out. They escape together. Mona is free again, outside, standing in the driveway of the Simpson home on Evergreen Terrace. For a moment, it looks like the ending that the show had been building toward across all of Mona's appearances. A mother and son, finally with the space to simply exist near each other without running. Then Mona collapses. She is brought inside. She is laid down. She is dying, and the people around her know it, and Homer is kneeling next to her. She looks at him. She begins a sentence. "Homer," she says. "I." She does not finish it. The sentence stops. Mona Simpson is gone. Homer stands up. He goes outside. He looks at the empty driveway. He looks at the street. The van that took her away at the end of Mother Simpson is gone from this moment. This time there is no van, no driving away, no slow departure. She is simply gone from the house and present in the ground at a funeral in the next scene. The question of what she was going to say has been discussed by the show's fan community since the episode aired in 2008. No writer has provided a definitive answer in any interview, commentary, or public statement. The DVD commentary for the episode does not resolve it. The incomplete sentence was a deliberate creative choice. The writers chose to end Mona's story without completing her last thought, but the content of that thought was never disclosed. Several possibilities exist within the logic of what the show had established about Mona's history with Homer. She may have been about to say something about loving him. "Homer, I love you." The simplest and most direct version of everything their relationship had been trying to say since season 7. She may have been about to tell him something she had never been able to say during the years of separation. An explanation, a confession, a piece of information about her life on the run that she had always intended to share and never found the right moment for. There is also a specific piece of Mona's history that the show introduced and never fully resolved. In a later episode, Mothers and Other Strangers, in season 33, it was revealed that Homer had encountered his mother at least twice between her original disappearance and the reunion in Mother Simpson. Once when he tracked her down at the age of 16, and once when Bart was born. These encounters, which would mean Homer had not been continuously ignorant of his mother's survival in the way Mother Simpson presented, were introduced in a later season and create a genuine tension with the original episode's emotional core. If Homer knew, or had known at some point and forgotten, or had been told something during one of those encounters that he did not retain clearly, then the incomplete sentence at the end of Mona Leavesa becomes even more layered. She may have been trying to tell him something he had once known and lost. She may have been trying to close a loop that had been open since one of those unshown earlier meetings. The sentence, "Homer, I," contains every possibility and confirms none of them. The show built an entire relationship across more than a decade of episodes, brought it to a deathbed, opened a final sentence, and stopped. Homer stood in the driveway of his house on Evergreen Terrace and did not know what his mother had been trying to say. He had been awake for this goodbye, as he had wanted to be at the end of Mother Simpson. He had been present and kneeling beside her and looking at her face when she died. He heard the beginning of the sentence. The rest of it is the one mystery in Springfield that no investigation could solve, no telescope could observe, no amateur detective could crack, and no courtroom could address. It is not a crime. No law was broken by Mona dying before she finished speaking. But within the full history of mysteries that Springfield has generated across 35 years of stories, the incomplete sentence at the end of Mona Leavesa sits in a category by itself. Every other mystery in this collection has a shape, a crime scene, a list of suspects, a sequence of events that can be traced and examined and questioned even when the answer stays hidden. The shooting of Mr. Burns had clues. The cat burglar left business cards. The alien in the woods left footprints and film footage. Even the cases that were never solved had an outline that investigators could work with. Mona's last sentence has no shape. There is no evidence to examine. There is no timeline to reconstruct. There is only a woman who was dying and began to say something to her son and ran out of time before the last word arrived. Homer won. Whatever came after those two words was the last thing Mona Simpson ever tried to give her son. He did not get it. The show did not give it to the audience either. The sentence ended where it ended, and the credits eventually rolled, and Mona Simpson stayed in the ground on the outskirts of Springfield, while Homer went back to his life at the nuclear plant and his family on Evergreen Terrace, and his usual collection of problems that were smaller and louder and easier to name than the one his mother left him with. He never found out. The show never said. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next mystery in Springfield is the only case in this collection where the criminal and the crime are both completely known, completely documented, and completely unpunished. Not because the justice system failed, not because the evidence was thin, but because the criminal owns the building where the evidence lives and has spent decades making sure that nobody with the power to act on it ever stays in that job long enough to do anything about it. Section 9. The Crimes of Montgomery Burns. The man Springfield could never touch. Montgomery Burns has been breaking the law in Springfield for as long as Springfield has existed. That is not an exaggeration. It is the most accurate single sentence that can be written about the relationship between Burns and the town he has dominated for the entire run of the show. He has stolen, manipulated, endangered, exploited, poisoned, bribed, defrauded, and on at least one occasion attempted to block out the sun over an entire populated area. He has done all of these things in full view of the people around him, with minimal effort to conceal them, and with the confidence of a man who has never seriously believed that any of it would catch up with him. He has been almost entirely correct. Start with the things the show has directly established about Burns and his history with the plant, because the plant is where most of his crimes originate and where most of his power comes from. The Springfield nuclear power plant is the economic center of Springfield in the way that a single enormous employer dominates a small town. It provides jobs, it funds local commerce indirectly, and its continued operation is treated by Springfield civic leadership as something close to a necessity. Burns understands this. He has always understood this. The plant's importance to Springfield is the wall behind which he operates, and he has never had any reason to pretend otherwise. Homer Simpson has worked at the plant since the earliest episodes of the show. His job title is Safety Inspector in Sector 7G, a position he has held across the entire run of the series. The Safety Inspector's job is to identify and report hazards within the plant that could endanger workers or the surrounding community. Homer has identified genuine hazards on multiple occasions. The plant has ignored, minimized, or quietly buried those hazards on multiple occasions. Burns has responded to safety concerns the way he responds to every inconvenience, by calculating the cheapest possible way to make the inconvenience go away without actually solving the underlying problem. The show established the plant's safety culture in its very first season. Homer's Odyssey, which aired January 21st, 1990, centered on Homer raising a safety concern about a specific danger zone in the plant. The concern was real. The danger was real. The response from plant management was to address Homer rather than the hazard, specifically to promote him to a safety inspector position where his concern for safety could be officially noted and then officially ignored at a higher level of bureaucracy. This dynamic, Homer identifies danger, plant absorbs the identification without fixing anything, runs through the show's entire history. The plant has been on the verge of a full nuclear meltdown on more than one occasion. In one of the most detailed examples, Homer's negligence in Sector 7G directly contributed to conditions that could have caused a catastrophic failure. The show treats these near disasters as comic situations. Within Springfield's fiction, they are also near criminal ones. A facility that repeatedly comes close to irradiating its surrounding population is a facility with a management problem. The management is Burns. The management has never faced a criminal proceeding over any near disaster the plant has produced. The fish in the lake behind the plant have 3 eyes. This was established in Season 2 and has been a consistent visual feature of Springfield's environment ever since. The 3-eyed fish named Blinky is the most visible piece of evidence that the plant's waste output has been damaging the natural environment around Springfield for decades. Blinky did not develop a third eye through natural processes. The mutation is a direct result of what comes out of the pipe that connects the plant to the lake. Burns owns the pipe. Burns has always owned the pipe. The fish have always had 3 eyes. No criminal prosecution has ever followed from this. A regulatory investigation in Season 2 produced a political campaign rather than a legal consequence. Burns ran for governor rather than pay for the environmental upgrades the state required. He lost the election. He did not pay for the upgrades. The pipe kept running. The lake stayed contaminated. The oil theft from Springfield Elementary is one of Burns's most documented crimes within the show's canon. In Who Shot Mr. Burns, the 2-part episode from Seasons 6 and 7, Burns discovered that Springfield Elementary had struck oil beneath its grounds. Rather than allow the school to benefit from the discovery, he drilled diagonally from the plant, tapped the school's oil deposit from below, and redirected the flow into his own operation. He did this while the school was actively planning how to use the oil money for the benefit of its students. The music program, the gymnasium, the basic infrastructure that years of underfunding had left broken. The theft was not subtle. Burns was aware that people would notice the oil disappearing from the school's accounts. He did not particularly care. By the time the community understood what had happened, he had already moved on to his next plan, using the oil money to fund the sun-blocking device that prompted his shooting. The oil was gone. The school's money was gone. Burns had it. After the resolution of the shooting in Season 7, the theft of the school's oil was never prosecuted. Burns recovered from his injuries, returned to the plant, and resumed operating. The school received nothing back. The oil was spent. The fund that would have rebuilt Springfield Elementary was absorbed into a plan that ended with Burns on a hospital bed and Maggie Simpson protected from arrest by Chief Wiggum's observation that no jury in the world would convict a baby. The election fraud in Sideshow Bob Roberts, Season 6, Episode 5, involved Burns in a supporting capacity. Burns was one of the powerful Springfield figures whose interest in conservative politics made Bob's campaign possible. The voter fraud that gave Bob the election, dead residents casting ballots, names from decades past appearing on the rolls, is the central crime of that episode. Bob was convicted. The fraud that produced his election was investigated. Burns's involvement in the political machinery that enabled Bob's rise was not a focus of the investigation. Burns's ownership of the plant creates a specific kind of legal protection that the show has depicted consistently without always naming directly. He employs lawyers. He employs Smithers, whose job includes managing every dimension of Burns's public and private affairs, including the dimensions that require damage control. He has relationships with politicians, judges, and civic leaders built over decades of being the most economically powerful person in Springfield. These relationships do not require explicit corruption to function as protection. The simple fact of Burns's economic importance to Springfield means that the people who might otherwise hold him accountable have reasons to be careful about how forcefully they act. Chief Wiggum is the most visible face of Springfield's law enforcement, and also one of the most visible examples of what happens when law enforcement lacks the capacity or the will to challenge genuine power. Wiggum investigates crimes involving ordinary Springfield residents with the full creative incompetence the show has always given him. He arrests Homer. He arrests Bart. He pursues Sideshow Bob through multiple imprisonments. He runs the Who Shot Mr. Burns investigation with an Agatha Christie novel as his reference guide for detective work. But the ongoing crimes of Montgomery Burns, the contamination, the theft, the safety failures, the environmental damage, have never been the subject of a Wiggum-led investigation that produced any consequence for Burns personally. This is not because Wiggum has decided to protect Burns. The show has never suggested a specific corrupt arrangement between them, though Springfield's civic leadership and Burns have a generally comfortable relationship throughout the series. The more accurate reading is simpler. Wiggum investigates what he can see and what he can manage. The crimes of a man like Burns operate at a level of complexity and institutional protection that the Springfield Police Department cannot reach. Burns's personal history contains violence beyond what the plant produces. He has, across the show, ordered or directly caused physical harm to people who stood in his way. His treatment of employees who displease him has included firing people in ways designed to cause maximum damage to their lives. He fired Homer multiple times across the show's run. He fired Smithers in the events leading up to the shooting of Who Shot Mr. Burns, a firing that removed the one person whose job included preventing Burns from acting on his worst instincts. The removal of Smithers was what allowed Burns to attempt to steal Maggie's candy, which was what put him in contact with Homer's gun. Burns's age is a recurring feature of the show's comedy, but also an important detail in understanding how his crimes have accumulated. He is old enough that his history with Springfield extends back further than any other characters. Flashbacks across different episodes have shown Burns at various points in the past. A younger man, still recognizable as the same person, still operating with the same fundamental relationship to power and to other people. He has been the most powerful person in Springfield for a very long time. The crimes he has committed across that time did not begin with the show's first episode. They began before it. The show touched on this in one of its most unusual episodes. Burns Under Siege, in later seasons, examined how thoroughly Burns had embedded himself in Springfield's systems over decades. But the most direct look at Burns's capacity for harm across a long stretch of time comes from the accumulation of individual episodes rather than any single special examination. Each season adds to the record. Each addition to the record sits alongside every previous entry in a file that nobody in Springfield's official capacity has ever consolidated into a single case. The environmental damage alone would constitute a serious criminal case in any functional legal system. Water contamination from nuclear waste is not a minor regulatory matter. It is a public health crisis. The residents of Springfield live near that lake. They fish in it. Their children fish in it. Bart Simpson caught Blinky in it and brought him home for dinner. The contamination that produced Blinky's third eye is in the water that Springfield's residents interact with regularly. Burns is responsible for that contamination. The pipe that delivers the waste is his pipe. The plant that generates the waste is his plant. The decision to route the waste into the lake, rather than dispose of it in a manner that does not destroy local fish populations, was made by someone at some point within Burns's organization and under Burns's authority. That decision has never been traced to a specific moment or a specific person in a court of law. It has never needed to be, because the court case has never happened. What makes Burns different from every other criminal in Springfield? Different from Sideshow Bob, different from Fat Tony, different from Malloy the cat burglar, is not the scale of his crimes, though the scale is significant. It is the complete absence of any sustained official effort to hold him accountable. Bob has been arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced more times than any other character in the show. Fat Tony has been brought before courts and juries, and has operated operated under the awareness that law enforcement is at least nominally aware of what he does. Malloy was caught, arrested, and escaped. These criminals exist in a relationship with Springfield's justice system, however imperfect that relationship is. Burns exists outside that relationship almost entirely. The shooting of Who Shot Mr. Burns is the closest the law has ever come to Burns, and even then, he was the victim rather than the subject of investigation. He lay on the sundial as the injured party. The investigation that followed was about who had shot him, not about what he had done to provoke every person in Springfield to the point where the shooting became possible. He recovered. He went home. He resumed operating the plant. The pipe kept running. Springfield has never found the mechanism to reach him. The plant is too important. His lawyers are too capable. His history in the town is too long and too deeply woven into the infrastructure of how Springfield functions. He is not untouchable because he is clever, though he is clever. He is not untouchable because his crimes are invisible, though many of them operate in spaces that ordinary people rarely examine closely. He is untouchable because the town he has damaged for decades is also the town that depends on him, and that dependency has always been a more powerful force in Springfield's relationship with Burns than any specific crime he has committed. Blinky swims in the lake. The pipe runs from the plant. The school never got its oil money back. Maud Flanders' death at the Speedway went uninvestigated. Sideshow Bob committed his first crime and was caught by a child. Burns has committed crimes across every season of the show and has been caught by no one with the power to make it matter. The most powerful man in Springfield has the longest criminal record in Springfield and the shortest list of consequences. That is not a mystery in the traditional sense. There is no missing piece to find, no hidden clue to decode, no final scene where the answer is revealed. The answer has always been visible. The fish have 3 eyes. The lake is that color. The pipe runs from the plant. Springfield just decided, somewhere along the way, that this was simply how things were. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next and final case in Springfield is the strangest one on this list. Not because the crime was unusual, not because the investigation failed, but because the show gave this mystery a complete and total resolution, and then, across the seasons that followed, quietly undid that resolution one episode at a time until the answer the audience had accepted for years stopped being the answer at all. Section 10. The Principal and the Pauper. The identity that Springfield ordered everyone to forget. Springfield Elementary School had a principal named Seymour Skinner. Everyone knew this. It had been true since the first episode of the show. Skinner was a fixture, stern, anxious, permanently under the thumb of his mother Agnes, perpetually trying and failing to impress Superintendent Chalmers, deeply uncomfortable in almost every social situation the show ever placed him in. He was a Vietnam War veteran. He was a man whose entire adult life had been shaped by his military service and by the specific emotional damage that service had produced. He ran the school with a combination of genuine dedication and total ineffectiveness. He was, across 8 full seasons of the show, one of the most carefully built supporting characters in Springfield's entire cast. Then a man walked into his anniversary party and told Springfield that Seymour Skinner did not exist. The episode is The Principal and the Pauper. It is the second episode of Season 9. It aired on September 28, 1997. The writer was Ken Keeler, and it was his final episode for the show. The director was Stephen Dean Moore. Martin Sheen provided the guest voice for the real Seymour Skinner. The episode is one of the most controversial in the show's history, and understanding why requires understanding exactly what it did to a character that Springfield had spent 8 years building. The setup is a celebration. Springfield Elementary is throwing a surprise party for Principal Skinner to mark his 20th anniversary as the school's principal. The community has gathered. The mood is warm. Skinner is genuinely touched. It is the kind of moment the show had given this character before, a recognition of his unlikely place at the center of Springfield's civic life despite his many failures and anxieties. Then a stranger walks in. The stranger is a man in his 50s or 60s, with a military bearing and a calm, direct way of speaking. He looks at Agnes Skinner and identifies her as his mother. He looks at the man everyone has been calling Seymour Skinner and says that he has been living under a stolen identity. The room goes very quiet. The man everyone knows as Principal Skinner admits that the stranger is correct. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He is not Seymour Skinner. He never was. He is an orphan from Capital City who grew up in the streets, got into trouble, and was given a choice by a judge after being caught stealing from an elderly woman and accidentally hitting the judge himself while trying to escape. The choice was prison, military service, or apologizing to the judge and the woman he had stolen from. Armin Tamzarian chose military service, and he said later that he would have chosen the apology if he had known there was a war going on at the time. In Vietnam, Armin met the real Seymour Skinner. The real Skinner was a sergeant, professional, principled, calm under pressure, the kind of person Armin had never encountered before in his life. The real Skinner had a dream. After the war, he wanted to go back to Springfield and become an elementary school principal. He wanted to do something useful and specific and good. He told Armin about this dream. He became Armin's mentor, and in the way the show presents it, something close to the big brother Armin had never had growing up without a family. Then the real Skinner was reported missing in action, presumed dead. Armin went to Springfield to tell Agnes that her son was gone. Agnes opened the door, looked at Armin, and called him Seymour. She knew on some level that he was not her son. The episode makes this ambiguous. She may have been in denial. She may have been making a deliberate choice to replace one man with another. She may have been in genuine shock. Whatever the reason, she called him Seymour, and Armin could not bring himself to correct her. She needed something. He was there. He stayed. He became Principal Skinner. He took the real Skinner's name, moved into the real Skinner's life, cared for the real Skinner's mother, and spent 20 years building exactly the career the real Skinner had described wanting. He was not the person the dream belonged to. But he ran the school. He did the job. He became, over 2 decades, the person Springfield Elementary needed him to be, even if he was never the person he claimed to be. The real Seymour Skinner had not died in Vietnam. He had been captured. He had been sold into conditions that amounted to forced labor, making shoes in a factory. He had been there for years. Eventually he got out. Eventually he made his way back. He arrived at his own anniversary party and found a stranger living his life, wearing his name, and calling his mother Mom. Springfield's response to this revelation was not what either Skinner expected. The town listened to the real Seymour Skinner. They heard his story. They understood that he was telling the truth. And then, slowly and collectively, they decided they did not want him. The real Skinner was correct in every fact. He was the actual Seymour Skinner. He had the actual claim on the name, the actual connection to Agnes as her biological son, the actual right to the position that Armin had been filling under false pretenses for 20 years. He was, by every measurable standard, the legitimate version of the person Springfield had thought they had. He was also, they found almost immediately, not quite right for them. He was too formal, too direct, too unwilling to bend. He ran the school with a rigidity that the town recognized as technically correct and personally exhausting. He spoke his mind without the anxious hedging that made the fake Skinner somehow easier to deal with. He did not have the specific damage and the specific softness that 20 years of being Armin Tamzarian playing Seymour Skinner had built into the man they were used to. Homer Simpson, of all people, became the voice of Springfield's decision. Homer argued that Armin should be allowed to come back. Not because the situation was fair, or right, or legally defensible, but because Springfield preferred him. Agnes preferred him. The school preferred him. The community had 20 years of experience with Armin as Skinner, and approximately half an episode of experience with the real Skinner, and the preference was clear. The real Seymour Skinner refused to accept this. He stood his ground. He pointed out that he had sacrificed himself for his country, been held in terrible conditions for years, and returned to find his own life occupied by someone else. He said he would not give up his name and his dignity just because the people of Springfield preferred the man who had stolen them. This was a completely reasonable position. It was also the position that Springfield decided to override. The town physically removed him. They tied him to a chair and put the chair on a flat car attached to a freight train. As the train pulled away from Springfield, the real Seymour Skinner shouted from his chair at the people watching him leave, telling them that they were treating him shamefully after everything he had done for his country. The train carried him away. He disappeared down the tracks and out of the episode. Then Judge Snyder issued a legal order. The order stated that Armin Tamzarian would from that point forward be known legally as Seymour Skinner. He would have Skinner's name, his past, his present, his future, and his mother. The order also stated that no one in Springfield would ever speak the name Armin Tamzarian again, under penalty of torture. The word torture was used in the order. The judge said it. It was written into the official legal record of Springfield's court system. The episode ended. Armin went back to being Skinner. Springfield went back to whatever it was doing before the anniversary party. The crimes in this episode are worth laying out carefully because the show moves through them quickly and the comedy of the situation makes it easy to miss how many things actually happened. Armin Tamzarian committed identity fraud for 20 years. He used a dead man's name, a man who turned out not to be dead, which makes the fraud ongoing rather than historical, to obtain employment, housing, and a position of authority over children at a public school. Every document he signed as Seymour Skinner was signed under a false identity. Every paycheck he received as Seymour Skinner was received under false pretenses. Every legal interaction he had as Seymour Skinner, tax filings, employment records, the professional credentials the show implies he obtained using the Skinner name, was conducted fraudulently. The real Seymour Skinner was kidnapped, as far as Springfield's legal record is concerned, at some point during or after the Vietnam War. The circumstances of his capture, his time in forced labor conditions, and his eventual escape are presented briefly in the episode without extensive detail. He returned to Springfield after decades of absence, made a legitimate claim on his own identity, and was physically restrained and removed from town by a crowd of people acting outside any legal framework. Being tied to a chair and placed on a freight train against one's will is a crime. Several crimes, depending on how specifically the law of Springfield is applied. The crowd that did this to the real Skinner included multiple named Springfield characters, which means the perpetrators of his removal are not anonymous. Judge Snyder's order is its own legal impossibility. A judge cannot legally reassign one person's identity to another person. A judge cannot order an entire town to never speak a name under penalty of torture. The order was issued. It was written down. It carries the authority of Springfield's court system, and it is built entirely on a foundation that would not survive 5 minutes of examination in any functional legal setting. The show knows all of this. The joke of the episode's ending is that Springfield used its own institutions to officially pretend that an impossible thing was a legal thing, and then ordered everyone to go along with it. The torture penalty for saying Armin Tamzarian is funny because it is so obviously disproportionate and so obviously an attempt to use fear to enforce a story that could not be enforced through reason. What makes the case genuinely strange is what happened in the seasons after the episode aired. The show did not treat The Principal and the Pauper as permanent canon. It treated it as something that needed to be quietly walked back without ever being formally addressed. In Season 21, Episode 12, Boy Meets Curl, which aired February 14, 2010, Agnes Skinner is shown pregnant with Seymour. She is carrying him. He is her biological son in the scene. This is not a flashback to an alternate timeline. It is a scene presented as part of the show's established history. Agnes carrying Seymour is incompatible with the story told in The Principal and the Pauper, where the real Seymour was a man she adopted as a kind of emotional replacement when Armin appeared at her door. In Season 29, Episode 4, Grampy Can You Hear Me?, which aired October 15, 2017, a teenage Seymour Skinner is shown living with Agnes before going to college. He is her son in this scene, physically present in her home as a young man, in a way that requires him to be her biological child with a normal childhood history. In Season 26, Episode 13, Walking Big and Tall, which aired February 15, 2015, a scene showing a young Seymour with Agnes was also presented in a way consistent with him being her biological son rather than an imposter who arrived at her door after Vietnam. The show did not announce these as corrections. It did not run an episode explaining that The Principal and the Pauper was being officially overwritten. It simply began, quietly and without fanfare, presenting Skinner's history as if the Armin Tamzarian story had not happened. Each scene that showed young Seymour with Agnes added another layer of normal history on top of the abnormal one the Season 9 episode had introduced. The show also mocked The Principal and the Pauper within its own canon. In Season 11, Episode 22, Behind the Laughter, which aired May 21, 2000, the episode presented The Simpsons as a television show that the Simpson family had been making together, in a parody of the VH1 series Behind the Music. In this episode, a clip from The Principal and the Pauper is shown as an example of the show having turned to gimmicky and nonsensical plots when its quality began to decline. The Simpsons used one of its own episodes as evidence of the show getting worse. The episode being used as evidence was The Principal and the Pauper. In Season 15, Episode 8, Marge vs. Single Seniors, Childless Couples and Teens, and Gays, when Lisa named her new cat Snowball 2 to avoid the expense of getting a new food dish after the cat's predecessor died. Skinner walked by and commented that it was a cheat. Lisa looked at him and said, "I guess you're right, Principal Tamzarian." Skinner quickly excused himself and walked away. The name Armin Tamzarian appeared in the show's canon, uttered by Lisa as a pointed joke about the entire situation, without the torture penalty from Judge Snyder's order being applied. The show acknowledged the episode existed, mocked the order to forget it, and then kept moving. The real Seymour Skinner is the character whose situation the show has never formally resolved. He was last seen on a freight train leaving Springfield, tied to a chair, shouting about his rights and his service. He has not appeared in any episode since. He has no resolution. He was in forced labor for years, escaped, came home, was thrown out of his own life by a crowd, and transported out of town against his will. His current status within the fiction of Springfield is unknown. He is presumably alive somewhere, a man with a legitimate name that a judge has legally assigned to someone else. In a town he is effectively banned from, with no record of any official authority ever acknowledging that what was done to him was wrong. Ken Keeler, the writer, borrowed the name Armin Tamzarian from a real person, a claims adjuster who had helped Keeler after a car accident when he first moved to Los Angeles. Keeler mentioned this during the DVD commentary for the episode. The real Armin Tamzarian was unaware that his name had appeared in the episode until after it aired. He contacted the production, according to the commentary, in a manner that was described as curious rather than angry. He wanted to know why his name was there. He was not threatening legal action. He simply wanted to understand what had happened. The real Armin Tamzarian, according to the commentary, later became a lawyer at a firm that represented the Simpsons. His name is in an episode about identity theft, and he became a lawyer. The show noted this coincidence in the commentary without additional comment. The case of Seymour Skinner and Armin Tamzarian is the only mystery in this collection where Springfield's legal system did not fail to act. It acted deliberately and wrongly. The system was used not to investigate a crime, but to ratify one. A judge signed an order making identity fraud the official legal truth of a situation, and then threatened everyone who might challenge that truth with a penalty severe enough to discourage challenge. Springfield solved the case the way it solved Malloy's escape and Burns's contamination and Maud's death by deciding that the easier answer was the acceptable one. The real Seymour Skinner was inconvenient. He complicated things. He required Springfield to acknowledge a wrong and make it right, which would have meant disrupting 20 years of established relationships and routines. The fake Skinner was comfortable, known, broken in exactly the right ways to fit the space he occupied. So Springfield kept the fake one, exiled the real one, and ordered everyone to forget the difference. The order worked for a while. The name Armin Tamzarian disappeared from the show's dialogue for years. The Skinner on screen went back to being Skinner, anxious and dedicated and mother-haunted, running his school with the same mix of effort and failure he had always shown. Springfield Elementary functioned. The parents sent their children. The teachers taught their classes. But the real Seymour Skinner is still out there in Springfield's fiction, on that train, or wherever the train went. A man with every legal right to his own name, sitting somewhere outside of Springfield, in a world where a judge's order has given that name to someone else. Nobody went after him. Nobody checked on him. Nobody in Springfield's legal system, or civic leadership, or law enforcement ever appeared to wonder what had happened to a Vietnam veteran who was physically removed from a town by an angry crowd and sent away on a freight train. The penalty for saying his name is torture. Springfield has not said his name. The final case in this collection is the one that most of Springfield walks past every single day without recognizing it as a case at all. No crime scene, no investigation, no suspect list. Just a man who has died approximately 40 times on camera and keeps showing up at the same locations, doing the same things, and the question of what Hans Mollman's existence actually means for every assumption Springfield makes about how the world is supposed to work. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.